The European Union is facing the worst crisis in its history, and how it reacts to it is going to shape the global economic and geopolitical world for the next 10 to 15 years. But what exactly is happening in Europe? The Russian invasion of Ukraine has had many impacts all over the world, including a compromised food supply, worsening hunger in some of the world's most vulnerable regions. Europe is arguably the most impacted region. 1. Because of its proximity to Ukraine, and 2. Because of its dependency towards Russia's cheap energy. Energy is an essential factor that enables country to grow economically. Every single good or service produced requires energy one way or another. Therefore, the rise of energy cost is endangering Europe, especially as other regions in the world can either produce their own energy or buy energy at a much cheaper cost. Some are even benefiting from the war in Ukraine because Russia still has an important supply of energy that needs to be sold. Europe is also facing a problem of dependency towards Asia for its imports and workforce, and is slowly realizing that its oldest ally, the United States, is also facing a decline against China and will not hesitate to walk over Europe if it has to in order to maintain its dominance over the world. The United States passed a new spending bill called the Inflation Reduction Act, which makes America more attractive for investment, attracting European companies that are more and more tempted to relocate their industries in America, especially with the rise of energy costs that the old continent is currently facing. Lack of access to Russian gas meant Europe, especially Germany, Austria, the Netherlands and Italy, had to seek other sources of energy. This proved expensive. Natural gas prices soared, particularly in September 2022, on investor fears of potential gas shortages and power cuts in the coming winter. Europe's natural gas price has since fallen sharply. This is due to a number of factors, including a relatively mild winter. Another factor is that several European countries have taken steps to reduce demand. This chart shows how demand for gas in Germany has fallen, and the purchase of gas from other sources, often liquefied natural gas cargoes, meant that Europe has avoided power cuts and has rebuilt its gas storage to healthy levels. Europe has met much of its need for non-Russian energy supply by buying up LNG cargoes. This comes at a cost, given that other countries are also seeking to buy extra LNG, partly because it is less polluting than alternatives such as coal. Also, 2022 saw limited demand for LNG from China, given how economic activity was constrained by COVID lockdowns. China's economic recovery will mean greater demand for the limited LNG supply available, leading to higher prices. New LNG supply is coming on stream, but it will not be ready for a few years. Supply can only meet demand growth from 2025 onwards. So what it means is that unless high prices help reduce the demand, the next 18 to 24 months will be very challenging for both Europe and Asia when it comes to importing liquefied natural gas. And obviously, the LNG market cannot keep growing if the world is to meet its net zero climate commitments. More investment is going into renewable energy, but it is not a quick fix. The sharply rising gas price has also had a significant impact on the European economy, sending inflation to double-digit levels. As gas prices tumble, inflationary pressure should ease, although other components, such as food prices, are still rising. The natural gas prices in Europe has been a large contributor towards higher inflation rates over the past year. At the latest European Central Bank meeting, policymakers noted the significant falls in prices since the end of 2022 will be a very helpful factor in lowering inflation rates later this year. The ECB has already signaled that it will raise rates again in March by another 15 basis points. However, it is stated that from March it will will evaluate the subsequent path of its monetary policy, potentially creating an opportunity to pause rate rises. One of the other issues Europe is facing is its dependence on Asia and more specifically on China. As we can see, EU is importing most of its goods from China, and this makes them really vulnerable as tensions between US and China rise. Let's say US impose a ban on China's import, like they did with the export of some advanced microchips. We can easily imagine what is going to happen if Europe has to choose one side between the US, which is its strongest military ally, especially with most countries in Europe being in NATO, which is under USA's control, noting that 20% of EU exports are directed towards the United States. And on the other hand, China, who has been for a very long time the industrial hub of Europe, who developed a strategy of relocating its workforce to reduce the cost of production, but is now suffering from it. France, for example, is noticing that the part of industry in its GDP is the lowest in Europe and therefore is really vulnerable to supply shortages like what happened during the COVID outbreak when the country was not able to get masks and critical medical equipment because it all came from China basically. The fact that Olaf Scholz went to see Xi Jinping when the tension between the US and China were at their peak when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan is actually really important because it shows that Germany is willing to hurt its relationship with the US in order to secure their economic stability through cooperation with China. We can only wonder what is going to happen if, let's say, China invaded Taiwan and the US forced European countries to stop any economic trade with China. Will they actually do it? How long will Europe be at the mercy of the US? Can it even afford to leave China at the moment? The European Union is only 33 years old, and I think that every 30 to 40 years since the Industrial Revolution, the world is prone to big changes in the political and economic global view. So what if Germany cut ties with the US and joined China instead? The European Union is really dependent on Germany's economic stability for it to be relevant. So if Germany leaves, the EU is no more a big player on the world stage. This has to be known. And if we look at the economic balance of European countries, Germany is single-handedly pushing the trade balance to a surplus, when France, in the opposite, is importing more and more as their industry is suffering and they have to buy a lot of energy since their nuclear reactors are not functioning well enough at the moment. The dependence is even more critical for the pharmaceutical supply. Nearly all API or active pharmaceutical ingredients producers worldwide source their API precursors in India and China, and so do API producers from Europe. European countries are 74% dependent on Asia, of which China is the most relevant country as it is responsible for almost 70% of the total Asian dependency. And as all of that happened, you will think that the US were there to push and help Europe economically. But the reality is that Europe has been naive enough to think of the United States as one of the European Union countries, but they're not, and they also have to serve their own interest. The Biden administration recently released a spending bill of approximately $400 billion called the Inflation Reduction Act, which basically puts at risk the competitiveness of Europe. The thing is, the attractiveness of Europe is already suffering from the rise of energy costs, and now the United States, which already has a more favorable environment for industries because the energy is much cheaper, is going to be even more attractive as they're going to be able to get tax reduction. So industries are going to be more likely to invest in USA rather than Europe. Europe has now to compete in a multipolar world where emerging countries are reaching a point where they are serious competitors, and it is important to make the right decisions to keep up with the development of those countries. The European Union recently launched a new fund to support European tech champions, but the amount of 3.75 billion euros doesn't seem really sufficient when we see, for example, the VC or venture capital market market, which is the market of investing in new startup companies, is around 332 billions in the United States in 2021. And if we look at Apple's net income in 2022, just Apple, right, it's around $100 billion. $100 billion of net income, and the European Tech Fund is only 3.75 billions. Like, those figures are astronomical, and we have to wonder how exactly Europe is going to compete with such low amounts. So what is really for sure is that Europe is really in a state of crisis, and it's facing a lot of different challenges. One of them being the war in Ukraine, rising the energy cost, also their dependence with Asia, their dependence on America. They have to make important decisions in the near future, and those decisions are going to shape the importance of Europe in the political and economic world, and we just have to hope that they're able to make the right decisions. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to know more about the dependence of Europe towards Asia notably, I'm gonna make a more in-depth video talking about what exactly are the key strategic areas where Europe is really dependent, and what exactly are the options that Europe has in order to regain their independence and become a key element on the geopolitical chessboard of the world. Thank you for watching.